I'm so very, very honored to welcome today's speaker, Victoria Bond, the internationally acclaimed composer and conductor. Her compositions have been praised by the New York Times as powerful, stylistically varied, and technically demanding. Bond's operas include Clara with the Berlin Philharmonic Easter Festival in Germany, Mrs. President with the Anchorage Opera, The Miracle of Light with the Opera in Chicago, Travels, Opera Roanoke, A More Perfect Union, the Center for Contemporary Opera, New York City. Bond has composed 8 operas, 6 ballets, 2 piano concertos, and numerous orchestral, chamber, choral, and keyboard compositions. She's been profiled in the Wall Street Journal, NBC, The Today Show, People Magazine, and New York Times. Her music is recorded on the Naxos, Koch, Albany, GEGA, Proton, and Family Classic labels. Bond is the creator, producer, and artistic director of Cutting Edge Concerts New York Music Festival, which she hosts every year in New York City, where she's joining us from today. She has been honored with the American Academy of Arts and Letters Walter Heinrichsen Award and the Miriam Gideon Prize. And this is just a short sample of the incredible things that Victoria has done, including composing 2 pieces of music inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe, both of which you're going to hear about and actually hear excerpts from during today's program. So without any further delay, Victoria, it is so wonderful that you're here, and I'm so very excited to turn things over to you.
Well, Molly, it's a great pleasure. I'm delighted to be here virtually with you and your wonderful audience for Mornings with O'Keeffe. Georgia O'Keeffe has been an inspiration for me for so many years, and I'm happy to share 2 works that I've written based on her paintings. The first I want to talk about and play for you is a piece called Blue and Green Music. And I had the good fortune to be able to sit in front of this painting at the Art Institute in Chicago and study it for many, many hours. I think the guard was ready to throw me out, but there I was looking at this magnificent painting. So when I got a commission from the Cassatt String Quartet to write a work for them, and of course the Cassatt is named after the artist Mary Cassatt, it occurred to me that Georgia O'Keeffe was the perfect artist to use as my inspiration for this particular quartet. And the first plan was to write a 4 movement string quartet based on 4 different works of hers, 4 different paintings. But as I sat there for hours looking at this painting, Blue and Green Music, it spoke to me of so many variations that I thought I will do all 4 movements on this one piece alone. Of course, the name music is part of the title of her work as well. But, and she said, since I cannot paint, since I cannot sing, I paint. Since I cannot sing, I paint. So there was music inherent in Georgia O'Keeffe as well as in this painting. And it had shapes in it that were very suggestive, but were not specific. So I wanted to capture that in my music. And as you can tell by looking at the painting, it is full of motion. The colors interweave, the shapes themselves have motion to them, and that all suggested music to me. So the fact that she limited herself basically to 2 colors, I wanted to limit myself to 2 musical themes, because then I could explore those themes with all of the variations. And as you see in looking at the painting, the variations of those colors are tremendous. The way they interweave, the way the shapes bulge out and contract. So even though this was not a one-to-one relationship between the painting visual and the music oral, still the idea and the emotions that were in that painting were something that I wanted to explore. So I thought the best thing to introduce you to my music is the last movement of this piece because it's fast and lively and somewhat jazzy, and it's called Dancing Colors. And I thought we'd listen to that now. So that was the fourth and final movement of my string quartet, Blue and Green Music. I received a commission this past year from an orchestra in Denmark called Concerto Copenhagen. And as a goodwill ambassador from America, I again turned to Georgia O'Keeffe for my inspiration, knowing that she had lived in New York City with her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, and had an extraordinary number of paintings of New York, so different than her flowers and landscapes and bones, her Southwest landscapes. These were urban landscapes. And I wanted to bring something of New York culture to Denmark. And so I studied her New York paintings, and the piece is called New York City at Night, and it focuses on four of her paintings, which I think you can see there in the graphic. And I thought I'd go by them one by one. Um, the first one is, what is the first one called? The first one, see, I wrote myself some notes, and I guess I should look at them. The first movement is called New York Night, and it shows a view from above. As you can see, you're looking down from a skyscraper onto the street below, and there is a ribbon of bright lights which intersect dark buildings in the foreground. And so that I wrote a very jazzy movement for that because the bright lights just seemed to indicate that to me. And O'Keeffe brought this kind of restless, frantic New York energy to a city which has been described as the city that never sleeps. And so my first movement is a jazzy one. The second movement, which is called City Night, is complete contrast. As you can see there, the monolithic buildings, these rather ominous buildings as seen from below, as opposed to the first movement where you're looking down from above. Here you're below looking up. And there is a kind of an ominous quality to this painting. The buildings are faceless. There's no detail other than the light. And the tall buildings frame a white building, also very stark and somewhat ominous, and a haloed moon at the very bottom of the painting. So it was the emotions of this painting that I wanted to capture in my music. And we will listen to this movement now.
Stay tuned. We will repair this problem. One moment.
Sure. While we're rebooting, as it were, let me talk about the other movements because they had so much significance to me, and they're quite contrasting to this one. The third movement is called uh, uh, Street Scene with Light. With what does it say here? Hmm.
With
There's a street light in the foreground. And what I found so vivid about this is that it appears to be pulsing. The two lights in this painting, the moon in the far distance, partially obscured by clouds, is very pale, and the street lamp in the foreground was, to me, it was pulsing. And I found that very fascinating. And then you have these box like buildings, which those three elements, the pulsing of the street lamp, the pale moon in the distance, and then these stark box like buildings, I found very fascinating. It's interesting that O'Keeffe will very often just take a few elements rather than cluttering, as it were, her images with so much detail. She takes a couple of very powerful images and focuses on them. So that's what I wanted to do in this particular movement, movement three. Um, in the last movement, which is, I believe it's called the radiator building, what I found fascinating about that was the pattern of the windows that are illuminated on this building. They're not in any kind of symmetrical pattern. They have this kind of counterpoint, this jazzy rhythm to them. And so I wrote a fugue for that particular movement on a very unlikely subject, and that is a boogie woogie bass. So I don't think we'll have a chance to hear anything other than the second movement. You tell me, Molly, because we could hear the second and the third movement. I've probably been too efficient and just chose two of my works rather than, or two movements rather than three. So when we get rebooted, we'll hear the second movement of this New York City at night. And if we have time, maybe we can hear the third movement as well, the city street with the street lamp. At any rate, I have yet another commission from the Cassatt String Quartet, and this time it is for a piano quintet, which is string quartet plus piano. And since Blue and Green Music, which is the work that I wrote for the Cassatt Quartet, was so successful, I again turned to Georgia O'Keeffe. And we're still working on what the title of that piece is going to be. But it will be, again, a four movement work for piano quintet. And I should have something new to share with you and your viewers and listeners next year. But in the meantime, how are we doing? Are we able to put that second movement of New York City at night up?
Yes, I believe we are back in business.
Great,
I can start it approximately where we left off.
good,
And I think also, to your point, I think we do have time if you'd like for me to just let it play on through the third movement as well. And we'll just cross our fingers that our internet cooperates. But thanks to everyone for your patience, and we will go ahead and resume with the second movement of New York City at night.
wonderful. So this was great fun to play for a Danish audience that was not that familiar with American jazz or with American popular music. And also, I have to say that the orchestra that was not used to playing this kind of music did a magnificent job. It was wonderful to be there and to feel the audience reaction. And of course, using Georgia O'Keeffe's artwork to me was what set this whole thing in motion. So I think you wanted me to talk a bit about my work as composer or my life. Molly, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that would be terrific. And, just having heard just a few quick words, it's just been lovely so far to actually sit with you, virtually and hear this music and see these images. And thank you so much for making this possible and to hear a bit more about what the process is like to do something like along the lines of this and your career would also be just so wonderful. We would really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, I've been to Santa Fe several times and, of course, visited the O'Keeffe Museum as well as took a tour of her home at Abiquiu. And so the relationship with Georgia O'Keeffe felt like a very personal one, which is what I like to achieve in my music. Rather than being just an abstract exercise, um, there's always some personal connection to a person in what I do, or to a drama. Um, in the case of writing for specific people, as I did in this case, writing for the Cassatt String Quartet or writing for Concerto Copenhagen, um, the people, I actually knew the people. And even with Concerto Copenhagen, they came to New York a couple of years ago and played a concert at Carnegie Hall. So I had a chance to hear them play, had a chance to meet the people. And then I went to Denmark and spent some time with them during their rehearsal period. And so it was, again, it was a very personal relationship. And I'm not sure that they were that familiar with Georgia O'Keeffe's work, certainly not as much as we are in this country. And so it was, I think, a revelation for them as well. Not only the music, but the artwork is also. So just to back up to the very beginning, I come from a family of my a family of musicians. My mother was a pianist, and my father was a singer. He sang with New York City Opera, and he was also a doctor. So he had those two professions going simultaneously. And my mother was a child prodigy. She had performed as a 10-year-old with the Chicago Symphony as a soloist. And so I grew up in a milieu of classical music. Jazz came a lot later when I was appointed Exxon Arts Endowment Conductor with the Pittsburgh Symphony under Andre Previn. And Previn, as a wonderful jazz pianist, invited such luminaries as Ella Fitzgerald and Oscar Peterson to appear with the symphony and on his television program. So it was then that I really got a taste for jazz, and it has become a part of my life ever since. So I went to a school in New York, Rudolf Steiner School. And then when I was 16, my mother and I moved to Los Angeles. And I went to Hollywood High and then UCLA and then University of Southern California. So two very different environments, New York and West Coast, all of which informed my music. And it's interesting because my dual life. My parents said, if you're going to be a musician, which they were very happy about, you have to have a performing instrument. So just being a composer without a performing instrument was something that they said was not possible, that I had to have a performing instrument. And I knew it was not going to be as a pianist. I didn't have that same relationship with the instrument as my mother had, but I did have a good singing voice, and I did a lot of performances as a singer. And so I thought, well, that'll be uh, my dual performance will be as a singer and as a composer. Samuel Barber did that, and he was kind of a role model for me because he wrote wonderful vocal music and he performed as a singer, beautiful voice. But then I had the opportunity to learn something about conducting. Um, I I took a class in Aspen, Colorado, with Leonard Slatkin. That was my first experience as a conductor, and it opened up a door for me, a whole other way of looking at music, which was much more global. As a conductor, you really have to have a sense of the entire piece. And as a conductor, that seemed like a better fit um, than being a singer and composer, being a conductor and composer. So that became the focus of my performance life. And my mother had gone to Juilliard, and I auditioned for Juilliard and was accepted first as a composer. And then in my second year, I switched to conducting. So I graduated from Juilliard with a major in orchestral conducting. And actually, I was the first woman to do so. And got a job, this wonderful job with the Pittsburgh Symphony, as I mentioned, Andre Previn, um, a major orchestra. I jumped into the deep water. A major orchestra has rehearsals and performances every single week, and in the summer they have a summer session. So it's a very full-time occupation. And I left. After I left that orchestra, after my internship, as it were, was up, um, I uh, I had a position with the Albany Symphony and with the Empire State Youth Orchestra, and then later with the Roanoke Symphony and Opera Roanoke. So my life as a conductor really, really took off. And whereas it was a good fit artistically to be doing both of those things, there were issues, and one of the issues had to do with time. Because when you're a conductor, your time is entirely monopolized by your work as conductor. Now, yes, there have been famous conductor composers such as Gustav Mahler and Richard Strauss, but their seasons had a pause in them. Summertime was a time off for Mahler. That's when he went to his conducting hut and wrote his massive, magnificent symphonies. And Richard Strauss also had these pauses in their conducting life, which doesn't exist anymore for a conductor. You're conducting basically all year round, and you're either rehearsing, conducting, studying a score, or on a plane. And that's it. So at a certain point, I said, the horse and the cart are now in the wrong position because conducting is driving my life and my compositions are taking a back seat. And there's so many pieces that I want to be writing that I don't have time to write. Plus, other people's music is in my head all the time. When you're a conductor, you really have to infuse yourself with the music of the person who you are conducting, the composer who you are conducting. And that kind of doesn't leave a lot of room to dream and to hear your own music. So at a certain point, I said, I got to cut off this um, uh, the conducting time, which is totally monopolizing my life. And I really have to pull back on that and devote more of my life to my life as a composer. And that is what I have been doing. And I tell you, I'm very happy I made that decision. I can get up in the morning and write and not feel guilty that I'm not studying a score. And it's allowed me time to write quite a few operas, which um, are very, very time consuming, as well as these orchestral pieces or the orchestral piece that you heard, and the string quartet. So my life has changed considerably since my days as a conductor composer, and now I'm composer conductor and doing far less conducting, and very happy about it. I also have a series in New York called Cutting Edge Concerts, and this came about because when I was living in Pittsburgh, um, I sort of lost connection with a lot of my fellow musicians that I had gone to school with and I had worked with in New York. So when I left Pittsburgh and moved back to New York, um, a friend of mine said, there's a series at Greenwich House, which is a venue here in Greenwich Village, which is where I live. And they have something called composer portraits. And I think they'd be happy to have you do a composer portrait. So that's what I did. And I invited my friends from Juilliard to perform, and I invited all of my acquaintances and friends in New York to attend. And it was a big success. So they said, we'd like to give you a series here at Greenwich House. You can have one of your own compositions on every program, but we'd like you to also have other composers. And this was great because I knew so many composers and it gave me an opportunity to be in touch with them, to present their music, to also bring in performers that I had worked with and some who I was just knowing for the first time. And so that series is called Cutting Edge Concerts New Music Festival. And it's been going on since 1998, and we're still going strong. We have performances here in New York at Symphony Space on Broadway, and we present music of living composers. I felt that was very important because so many concerts focus on music of the past with an occasional nod to contemporary music. And I wanted this series to be only living composers. So that's the thumbnail elevator pitch of me as a composer. And I think you wanted to open this up to some questions from your audience. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. Let me go ahead and stop my screen sharing here. And for folks, there's a possibility that you may have put some questions in the Q&A box that I have since lost after losing connection there. So please at least put them back in just so that we don't miss anything. But in the meantime, I want to to thank you so much also just for sharing that journey of your career. When we talk about Georgia O'Keeffe and her life and legacy, she did so many different types of things over the course. She was a teacher. She traveled extensively towards the end of her career to different countries. She settled in New Mexico, and it's just so wonderful to hear from your perspective as a composer all the different things that you were able to do and how you were finding your voice as a conductor, but moving back to the work that you're doing now. And I think that we really just appreciate you sharing that with us.
Well, you know, I felt I was very lucky to be my own composer in residence when I was
Mm.
conducting, because there's nothing like learning from the masters, and that's what you do when when you have to roll up your sleeves and get there in the pit or on the stage and conduct the music. It's a very different experience than listening to it as which is a much more passive experience. Here, you're actually involved. Um, if not creatively, recreatively. The other thing I wanted to say about Georgia O'Keeffe, which I found so meaningful, was the incredible variety of styles. With that integrity that she had as an artist, the difference in her New York paintings, in her Southwest paintings, in her flowers, in blue and green music, there is such a sensitivity to the environment that she was in, that she was able to bring to her artwork. And having traveled a lot, I've done conducted in China and South America and in Europe, just being able to absorb something of those cultures on a firsthand basis and without changing my style, but rather incorporating that into who I am as an artist. I feel, again, a great kinship with the way she was able to do that, to maintain her integrity and yet have this enormous variety. And apropos that, I know I'm not giving anybody a chance to ask any questions, but you're you just set me off on a journey here. Apropos that, the fact that she limited herself very often, like in blue and green music, limited herself to two colors and explored the variations within that limitation. I find that very stimulating in itself, rather than just throwing a lot of material at the ear, as it were. Rather to limit it to a couple of elements and just really go into them in great depth.
Mm. And just the way that you speak about these paintings and your interactions with them and O'Keeffe and her story, it's just so clear that this is very inspiring for you. And I wonder if there are other examples of visual art or other visual media or culture that have influenced some of your compositions outside of Georgia O'Keeffe.
Yes, indeed. But I'm thinking that, going outside of that into theater, um,
Mm.
um, words also inspire me a great deal. One of my go-to literary people is James Joyce. And again, a deep connection with music. As Georgia O'Keeffe said, since I cannot sing, I paint. James Joyce was also a singer, a professional singer, as well as, of course, a great writer. So the sound of the words, the way he uses words, was very important. Dance-wise, I've done a lot of work with choreographers, and as I was talking about the motion in blue and green music, even though a painting is, well, it's only peripherally static. I mean, the paint is on the page, so it doesn't actually jump out and move. But if you sit there and you study it long enough, you can feel the motion within that. Um, to answer your question, have I used other visual artists to the same degree as O'Keeffe? Not really. I just found that she was the quintessential artist who inspired me to to hear the music in her work and the emotion behind what those visual images were. And of course, the other wonderful thing about her work, um, particularly blue and green music, is that, like music, it's abstract and yet it's suggestive. I mean, if you look at those shapes, you can see things in them, and I'm sure different people see very different things in those shapes, but it doesn't tell you what they are. And even in the New York paintings where you have specific buildings, still there is something about them that is not realistic, that goes beyond realism into an emotional portrait, as it were, of the city. You know, when you see those black monolithic buildings, that's not just representing skyscrapers. That's giving you that sense, which I find somewhat ominous and terrifying, of these primal forms that are without detail. So um, really, it is Georgia O'Keeffe who has inspired me visually. I'm not primarily a visual person, which is interesting. I really absorb things much more through sound than I do through sight, because my eyesight is not great. But she is the person that, to me, goes beyond purely visual, into the emotional life of the things that she is portraying.
Mm. And it's if many of our audience members will of course know that Georgia O'Keeffe was a music enthusiast as well. She had a wonderful, extensive collection of music and a special sound system in her Abiquiu home so that she could enjoy it to the best of quality. And so it's so very interesting to hear you and also with Georgia O'Keeffe's background and other artists to understand the blending of different disciplines. So even with a visual painting, many of us are going to have associations perhaps with music, as in the case of that you just described, or with poems or writers or plays. And it's just so beautiful to know that the arts as a whole are so very tied together in a beautiful weaving that we can experience all the time. But it's not something that we always get to shine a light on, so to speak. So to hear that is lovely.
The,
We
the
oh
yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say the other thing about O'Keeffe is her relationship to nature, which is
Mm,
very powerful for me as well. And basically, my best workplace is taking a walk. That's where I get my best musical ideas. Whenever possible, I take a walk in the morning, and that's when ideas come in. Not sitting in front of a keyboard or sitting in front of a sheet of blank paper, but rather taking a walk. And it just seems like the ideas are there. And when I put my mind at rest and just uh, put myself in an environment, they come, and they come unbidden. Well, I bid them. I want them to come, but it's not like I'm going out and saying, yeah. It's just the fact that the power of nature and the well, inspiration means breathing in. So it is that breathing in of the air. I love trees. Now that's a big difference than the Southwest um, landscape, although she does have paintings, wonderful tree paintings. But you know, just breathing in the air that the trees give you is something very important. And animals. I wrote a piece about wolves called "Thinking Like a Mountain," because wolves is the top predator in the food chain. If wolves disappear, then the browsers, the deer, eat all the vegetation, and the soil washes away, and mountains are dead. So the wolf as predator is very important. Plus, wolves sing.
hmm.
Now, what what's not to love about an animal that gets together to sing? And their songs are very beautiful. They're not like dogs barking. I mean, they actually have this wonderful high-pitched song. And well, in my travels, I was writing this piece, Thinking Like a Mountain, and I wanted to incorporate wolf howls, or wolf, you know, howl is not the right word, wolf songs into my music. So at that time, I had a, you know, recorder, a tape recorder, and I had wolf, actual wolf sounds on it. And I remember I was in a hotel room and I was playing that at night, and I opened the door, and my neighbor uh, in the next room stuck her head out and was looking to see who is this crazy person who is making these sounds next door. So, the sounds are very potent and very beautiful.
That's so interesting. I want to hear a wolf song now. I'll have to add that to my to-do list.
Well,
Um, we do have a question from Carol. Carol wants to know if you've ever composed music for movies. The music that we heard played from the City Night piece reminds her it's a spooky kind of Alfred Hitchcock, which you talked about the oppressive and scary kind of nature of being overwhelmed by those buildings. So,
yes, well, when I was in Los Angeles, I actually ghost wrote several scores for some pretty well-known composers. One of them was what I call my fish music. This was for Jacques Cousteau underwater series, and my name does not appear on the film because I was just a kid, and but I did have a chance to write for a full orchestra at an early age and hear it played the next day, which means, of course, you stay up all night. But yeah, that was my fish music. And also for something called Man in the City with Anthony Quinn. And yeah, I think I learned a great deal from film music because like opera, it is creating a dramatic scene. Now, the difference with a film score and an opera is that the music has to take a back seat to what's happening dramatically. And in the case of Alfred Hitchcock, of course, he was very, very aware of his great composer, Bernard Herrmann, who, the famous in Psycho, I'm sure he gave Herman much more free rein to explore his creativity because Hitchcock was a great artist, and so yeah, those films are wonderful, and there are a lot of great film composers, no question about that. I had a chance to do some scoring of films, but um, what one of the film composers in Los Angeles told me that I should be careful of living in LA and going into the track of being a film composer. He said, you will always be addicted to the cue sheet. So the cue sheet, of course, is tells you what is happening in that scene. And your music in specific time segments has to coordinate with what's happening visually. And as you know, as an artist, if an idea takes hold and wants to develop, the best thing that you can do is to follow where it needs to go. And if you are, in a way, straitjacketed by what is happening in the story and on the screen, it definitely inhibits the creativity. Plus the fact that you're not supposed to be the main event in a film score. You are the background, as it were, and the foreground is what's happening. So it's a different experience than Georgia O'Keeffe as a painter and being able to use that as a jumping off point rather than limiting the amount of time that I could do as a composer.
mhm. It's very interesting to hear a bit of the things behind the scenes that some of us who would be watching movies may not understand as far as the logistics and the time and what it would mean to compose movie music. So thank you very much. We have time, I think, for one more question, and I'm going to share this one. This participant asks, Miss Victoria, you are such an inspirational, powerful woman. I'm so amazed. Do you have any advice for young women about harnessing inner strengths to reach your dreams, or any words of positivity that we can take to the future?
Absolutely. Yes. Follow your dream. I mean, certainly Georgia O'Keeffe did that. And don't let the naysayers dissuade you from what you want to do. I mean, the stories are legion of great artists who have been told early on, you've got no talent, give it up. And they did not take that negative advice. They went their own way. And, it's not for anyone to judge your work, um, particularly in the beginning when your work is very fragile. And I would really advise people not sharing their early, if you're painting your early sketches with anyone, or if you're starting a painting that takes a while to finish, not to share your early efforts with anyone, because then their criticism, then you'll be looking at it from somebody else's viewpoint rather than expressing who you are. And it's not for anyone else to judge who you are. Now, I do believe in constructive criticism, mostly your own. And the way that can come about is if you let a work sit for a while and then you come back later, several months later, let's say, or even a year later, and you look at it and you say, ah, all right, that was a good idea. Well, I can do better with this, so that the judge and the what I call the finger painter, and I call it a finger painter because children have this joyous way of saying, yes, I will cover all the walls with whatever with finger painting, and not feel any sense of inhibition. It's that inhibition that can choke off creativity. And so to be able to let your whatever ideas come to you, good, bad, or indifferent, and not judge them yourself until they're out there and you can look at them later and be able to judge them. So that would be my strongest advice.
That is very sound advice, and I think something that maybe all of us need to hear every so often, to dream and to not worry about the naysayers. I think I'll keep that in mind for the rest of the day. So thank you for sharing
And we
that.
need to remind us of ourselves of this every day, because believe me, there are a lot of naysayers out there for whatever reason. They want to tear your work apart or tear you down. And particularly as a woman, now it's a lot better than it used to be, but I'm sure in Georgia O'Keeffe's day, being a woman artist was a very fragile position to be in, because people didn't take women seriously in any capacity other than motherhood. So, it's a lot better today, but it's, still a lot of women feel like they are not worthy, and they are. We are.
Indeed, we are. And that's such a wonderful note, I think, to end our conversation. We are right at 10 o'clock, and this time went by so quickly, but it's been such a pleasure to sit with you, to hear your music, to look at the things that inspired you to create it. And before we go, are there any last, parting words that you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
Well, new piece is on my desk, as it were. And again, this is inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe. It's a piano quintet, and it's going to be performed this summer in Maine and in New York in the fall. And I'll have a new piece to share with you. So I'm excited about that.
As are we. So, everyone, please stay tuned. We will definitely be in touch with Victoria. We're eager to see what this project will become. So, yes, very nice way to end the talk with a little teaser for what's to come. So, thank you so very much. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Molly. Pleasure to
Thank
be here with you.
you. Thank you. Great. And everyone, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. And we appreciate it. Thanks again. Bye bye.